And now let's move on to 6C, which is a 12-mark question. So it's a discuss question. Discuss the impact of improved transport links between African countries on the economic growth rate. To answer this 12-mark question, the first thing I'm going to do is look back at my 8-mark question. So one of our reasons for the 8-mark question was poor infrastructure. We said poor infrastructure was one of the causes of high costs of transporting between African countries. Now, this question is presenting us a scenario saying what would happen if there was improved transport links, so improved infrastructure basically. So in the previous question we've said poor infrastructure leads to high cost. So what does improved infrastructure or better infrastructure lead to? It's going to therefore lead to low cost. And how does these lower cost of production affect firms? And we need to remember the classical economic assumption. Firms are profit maximizers. So if a firm was producing 100 units and that cost them £10, but now due to these improved transport links, those 100 units only cost them £9. What do we assume a firm is going to do? A firm is therefore going to increase production. Why? As for that same £10, they might now be able to produce 120 units. And with that 120 units, of course, they can make more profits. So these lower costs due to improved transport means that trade between African countries is now a lot more efficient. And if it's easier for firms to import and export goods, they'll import and export more. Now, what do lower costs cause? And let's think about this on a diagram. What diagram can we show a firm's costs falling on, and how does it affect a firm, and how does it affect the economy? We can show that on an SRAS, since we of course use SRAS when dealing with costs. So if a firm's cost is falling, of course the SRAS is shifting outwards. And if SRAS shifts to SRAS1, what happens to price level and what happens to real GDP? As you can see, price level decreases, and more importantly, real GDP is increasing from YE to Y1. And why is real GDP increasing? But we need to remember firstly, what is real GDP? Gross domestic product. And gross domestic product essentially is the same as national output. So what we're saying, with lower costs, there's more national output. And why is that? Since when there's lower costs, it means higher profitability for firms. As if firms are spending less on, for example, wages when drivers are driving, as maybe borders are more clear, it takes them less time to get through the border, therefore they have to pay these drivers lower wages since they're employing them for less hours. It means the firms now, the markup on the product, the profit they are making on each product is higher. And remember, this goes back to the classical economic assumption. What are firms? Firms are profit maximizers. Therefore, if their products, if their goods and services have a higher profitability, what they're likely to do? They're likely to exploit that basically. They're likely to produce more to try hopefully make even more profit. So simply, with higher profit margins due to lower costs, firms are incentivized to produce more. Thus, of course, as you can see on this diagram, we get an increase in the real GDP from YE to Y1, which of course links perfectly to the question, so what effect is that going to have on economic growth rates? Of course, when real GDP increases, that means economic growth, more specifically positive economic growth. So, and of course, this 12-mark question, you still need to be wary. There are application marks. So the question's on improved transport links. So I'm going to quickly scan through the extracts. This is probably not very much to do with improved transport links, so I'm just going to use extract A again and just get out a few stats just to make sure I'm picking up those 2 application marks. And this is a great stat here. So the IMF estimates if basically infrastructure improved, intra-African trade would improve by 7%, which is a great stat to use. Now I always say, of course, with a 12-mark question, there are 4 evaluation marks, but I always say try to evaluate using the extract, and there's an absolute gem in this extract. So of course, we're evaluating basically a point, which is improved transport links will cause lower costs. But if you remember back to this extract, I think in the 3rd paragraph, about here, it mentions China. So China did invest into, I believe it was the railway lines, and one of the main points, it says Chinese built railways are underused because of price. So a great evaluation point here is, however, in evaluation, the improvements in transport, reducing a firm's costs, depend on how much this new transport is priced at, so how much it actually costs. As if these new railways are priced too high, they will therefore firstly just not reduce a firm's costs, leading to the several benefits of like shifting SRAS will not be achieved, and also it will be like a waste of money, since if they're too expensive they will be underutilized, and you can talk about like opportunity costs there. So essentially, the lower costs depend on the price of the transport, as the transport is too expensive, of course it will not lower the cost. Now, so that is evaluation done. Since it's only 4 marks, I would pretty much, what I suggest to most students, one evaluation point at the end of your first paragraph, then another one at the end of your second paragraph. If your one at the end of your first paragraph is very developed, you probably don't even need the one at the end of your second paragraph. But if you have time and you want to make sure you're secure, I would try to aim for 2 evaluation points. For the second paragraph, now what would I refer to? What would I speak about? And I talk about the concept of India. This is a massive topic I always mention in my life classes, since India is a great case study. It's obviously a massive developing country. I think it has over a billion population now. But post 1991, so post liberalization of India, what is one of the main things they did? They tried to reduce wage costs and non-wage costs. So wage costs are things like just like minimum wage. They tried to scrap the minimum wage, and they try to reduce non-wage costs, which are things like legislation. It's a great example, the contrast between the UK and India. So UK, of course, has massive legislation with workers. I think there's one notable example is construction workers, I don't believe legally are allowed to stand on the top level of ladders. But basically, UK workers have lots of protection, great working conditions. And if you can contrast that with India, where they don't have much protection, the working conditions are quite poor. But what was the reason for India reducing these wage costs and these non-wage costs? As overall, the worsened working conditions, so the looser legislation and the reduced wage costs for firms, so the reduced wage they have to pay their workers, why does that incentivize firms? Why is that positive for firms? As it means firms' costs are now lower. And if firms' costs are now lower, if there's a massive transnational corporation looking to invest into a country, they are likely to invest in countries with low costs. Why is that? And it all goes back to the classical economic assumption. Firms are profit maximizers. They want to maximize their profits. And what is a really good way to profit maximize? You obviously want high revenues, but also you want low costs, as that gap in between is all the profit for firms. So back to the question, the second impact of improved transport links between African countries will be increased FDI. And why is that? Again, it's due to lower costs for these firms, because these firms are now going to see, as there's improved transport, it's going to lead to lower costs for the firms to transport goods, meaning that there's going to be increased FDI, as there's going to be more opportunity for these transnational corporations to make profit. And of course, you don't need to use 2 diagrams in your 12-mark question, but I believe it's very relevant here, and it doesn't take long. It literally should take you about 20 seconds to draw this out. I would 100% draw an LRS curve and an LRAS shifting outwards. Why? Since if a transnational corporation, if a firm invests in India or Africa with FDI, it will lead to further improvements in their infrastructure, therefore also causing economic growth. And with regards to FDI, a great evaluation always will be transfer pricing, where you could say, however, the positive effects of foreign firms investing into Africa may be limited by transfer pricing, where new firms come in, they could maybe just exploit Africa for its workers, for its resources, and then any profits it makes, it sends back to a country with lower tax rates, like corporation tax rates, of course a classic example is Apple and Ireland. But of course, if a firm transfer prices, it limits the positive effects on the country it's producing in. Thus, in this scenario, you could say it could limit or cause negative economic growth. And of course, that's just one of the evaluation points you can give here. The extract gives you many. But the question, if you think directly to the question, it's talking about economic growth rates and the impact of improved transport links on economic growth rates. But you could also evaluate saying there might be more effective policies to cause economic growth rates. Like, there's hundreds of things you can think about. Let's try to find something in the extract. Yeah, so even something as simple as tariffs. So here, like we've seen previously, it says by reducing tariffs, it's going to increase trade between these countries. And that is probably a lot easier. And of course, it definitely is a lot more simple than building infrastructure, building thousands of miles of railways, etc., etc. So you could say, however, in evaluation, this depends on the most effective and efficient policy to increase economic growth between the countries, as reducing tariffs may be a lot more efficient, a lot easier, and a lot more effective. So with evaluation, I will never take any student's excuse. You should always be scoring full marks, as there is just so much evaluation, especially for your section B. You've got the extract, you've got your own mind, that you should be smashing it every single time. Okay, that is a wrap for the 12-mark question. Let's move